What you're about to hear is a first-person confession inspired by the real story, or perhaps the legend, of the human experiments conducted in the camps under Dr. Joseph Mengele's command. I didn't start with blood on my hands. I started with a clipboard. They told us it was for science, that these children, the ones who arrived holding hands, trembling, wide-eyed, were necessary. They said twins were nature's perfect test subjects, same blood, same bones, different destinies waiting to be split apart. I believed it. I believed it when they shaved their heads, when they tattooed their arms, when they whispered in the dark, and I wrote down their words like data points. I thought we were uncovering secrets, that somewhere inside their matching bodies there was a code waiting to be broken. But we weren't breaking codes. We were breaking something older, something sacred. And once it broke, the silence inside them was louder than anything we ever discovered. The trains always came at dawn, creaking along frozen tracks, metal sighing against metal, delivering new cargo wrapped in rags and trembling skin. We waited at the gates, notebooks in hand, pretending we weren't already choosing, pretending we didn't know what we were looking for. But when the doors opened, it was easy. They always came in pairs, two small figures clinging together, two sets of matching eyes. Sometimes smiling, sometimes silent, but always unmistakable. Twins, nature's control group, a perfect split of identity laid bare. The guards barked, pulled, shouted. Chaos spun around them, but the twins clung tighter. They didn't understand yet. Not what we were, not what we would become. They were separated first, before the old men, before the mothers, before the sick. A hand would grab their shoulders, pulling them aside, away from the lines. They were catalogued immediately, height, weight, blood type, if time allowed. We took photographs, face forward, profile, 3/4, like artifacts for a museum none of them would survive to see. They were numbered on the spot. Left twin, right twin. No names, no need. The doctors hovered like carrion over a battlefield, smiling, touching hair, measuring limbs, comparing eye color to swatches held against sunburned cheeks. Perfect specimens, they said, perfect mirrors. Each one a question begging to be answered through separation. My job was to prepare them, not to harm, not yet, to weigh them, measure the circumference of wrists, ankles, skulls, record the distance between pupils, calculate the weight differential between two hearts that once beat in the same womb. At first, I moved carefully. They were children after all. Some only 4 years old, others barely teenagers. Their shoes wore matching holes. Their sleeves were stitched with the same trembling hands. I told myself they were lucky, chosen, protected by their rarity. I lied to myself with efficiency, because the longer I watched them, stood before them with calipers and ink, the less they seemed like children at all. They became data points, symmetry and asymmetry, biological experiments waiting to be divided. I stopped seeing the way they reached for each other, stopped noticing how one would flinch when the other cried. I learned to mark the stronger twin with an asterisk, to log which one was more resilient to cold, to smile when the doctors praised how clean my notes were, how organized my samples, how well I had catalogued the units. They liked to talk about them in technical terms, not children, units, subjects, sets. I learned their vocabulary quickly. The twins will be rotated through Group B protocols next week. The smaller one will be the variable, the larger will be the control. Prepare them for extraction. Extraction, as if we were drawing water from a well and not carving into something living. I watched the fear drain from their faces over the days that followed. Not because they stopped feeling, but because they understood. Quietly, wordlessly. One twin would look at the other when the needles came. One would stop struggling first, just to show the other how to surrender. It became a language I didn't need to record. There was a strange kind of love between them still, even at the end. A loyalty I had never seen in the adults, who begged and betrayed and broke apart the moment the guards raised their voices. The twins didn't beg. They leaned into each other, and that was why they were chosen, because it was easier to study separation when something real had to be broken. I watched them line up barefoot on cracked tiles, holding each other's hands until someone forced them apart. Left twin to one side, right twin to the other. I weighed their silence against the clatter of my clipboard. I measured the distance between their fingers as they reached for each other one last time. Names were dangerous. That was one of the first lessons we were taught. Names carried weight, history, memory. They implied that the subject had a past, a family, a future beyond the room where they now stood barefoot and shivering. Names were an anchor, and anchors had no place here. So we stripped them away. Every twin became a code, a designation written in heavy black ink on forms and chartboards. Left twin, right twin, A and B, 201A, 201B, 347L, 347R. The first time I was handed a clipboard, I hesitated. Beneath the freshly assigned numbers, in tiny smudged letters, someone had scrawled their real names. Anna and Marta, sisters, barely 8 years old. I crossed the names out myself, not because anyone ordered me to, because it was easier to hurt numbers. We led them into rooms where lights buzzed like flies and cold tables gleamed under flickering bulbs. They sat quietly, their small bodies trembling, but they obeyed. They always obeyed. We injected dyes into their veins, brilliant blues, sickly yellows, chemical greens, watching how the colors spread, how quickly the blood changed hue. We measured everything, heart rates, temperature drops, time until the first visible reaction, endless examinations. Some twins were strong, others withered after a single injection. We were told it was valuable information, important data for the Reich. I told myself that too. We took blood from one twin and injected it into the other, marking the variations in clotting, in rejection, in collapse. We opened veins like water taps, logged the volumes like accountants balancing ledgers. They didn't scream at first. It was the silence that unnerved me. Silent except for breathing, except for the scratch of my pen. I learned to anticipate the sounds, the shallow gasps, the choked whimpers, the way skin scraped against the metal tables when they shifted. But I will never forget the first time it happened. We had just drawn blood from a left twin, small boy, no older than 6. His brother sat strapped in the next chair, eyes wide but dry. The syringe slipped slightly in my hand, clumsy, rushed, and the boy cried out. A sharp, pained sound. And across the room, his brother flinched. Not at the noise, at the pain, as if he had felt it too. There was no physical contact, no medical explanation, only that thread between them. Thin, invisible, real. Something ancient moved through them in that instant. Something older than our knives and charts. Something we would spend months trying to sever. After that, I noticed it more. One would fall ill, and the other would weaken. One would refuse food, and the other would vomit. Their bodies, their minds, entangled in ways we couldn't measure, only break. And still we continued. Measurements, injections, bloodletting. We documented changes without asking what we were destroying. We stopped wondering if the thread between them could teach us something beautiful. We focused only on how to unweave it, how to split it apart strand by strand, like children pulling the wings from flies. The numbers made it easier. When 412B convulsed on the floor, it was data. When 603A lost consciousness after saline overload, it was an anomaly. When 225L and 225R refused to let go of each other's hands, even as the needles pierced them, it was noted with asterisks, but never discussed. We didn't see them anymore. We saw entries, figures, variables to be managed, even when they looked at us. Those eyes that searched for something human behind our gloves and masks. We kept writing. Their faces blurred, their stories dissolved. Their humanity was erased by the ink of our own hands. And with every chart I filled out, With every name I crossed away, it became harder to remember whether I was documenting their deaths or measuring the slow disappearance of myself. At night, when the corridors emptied and the lights dimmed, the whispers would begin. Soft, urgent, barely audible above the hum of the generators, but persistent. A language carried in the dark, woven from breath and fear, slipping beneath the doors of the barracks and threading itself through the cracks in the concrete. It was always the twins. Even when separated into different rooms, even when forbidden to see one another, they found ways to reach across the distance. I heard them through the thin walls as I walked the night patrols. Two voices, perfectly matched, exchanging words no adult had taught them. Not German, not Yiddish, not anything I recognized. Something older, something private. I started hearing them even when I wasn't near the barracks. A soft murmur in the back of my mind, like the echo of a conversation just out of reach. It followed me into sleep, wrapping itself around my dreams. At first, I thought it was exhaustion, long shifts, stress, the toll of documenting endless procedures. But then the words began to take shape. I would wake with phrases on my lips, fragmented, unfamiliar, in a language I had no memory of learning. Words that faded the moment I tried to hold onto them, like sand slipping through clenched fists. Once I scribbled a few sounds onto a scrap of paper as I woke. Ashenai, Dulum, Veskra. They meant nothing to me, but the moment I saw the twins again that morning, one of them, designated 114R, locked eyes with me across the clinic floor and smiled. Not the smile of a child meeting kindness, the smile of someone recognizing a secret. I tried to dismiss it, tried to drown it in procedure. Blood draws, reflex tests, reflex, as if repetition could scrub meaning from the air. But meaning clung. It clung when one twin fell ill and the other followed, despite separation and sterilization. It clung when we inflicted wounds on one and saw bruises flower hours later on the other's untouched skin. No medical explanation fit. No theory of infection or contamination could account for what we saw. There were nights I stood outside their barracks, hand on the doorframe, listening to the soft, desperate cadence of their voices twining together through the dark. I could almost see the invisible bridge between them, a shimmering thread, vibrant and defiant against everything we tried to destroy. We increased the experiments, greater separations, heavier sedation, forced isolation. Still, they found each other. One night, after administering a double-blind pain trial, I watched from the observation window as the right twin, heavily dosed, near unconscious, twitched violently in his sleep. Moments later, the left twin, miles away in a separate wing, gasped and clutched his side at precisely the same moment. We recorded the timestamps. We filed the data, but none of us spoke about it aloud. We were trained to measure, not to believe. Still, belief gnawed at me, because deep down I knew we weren't studying biology anymore. We were severing something older, something sacred. Something that existed long before our knives and syringes, something carried in their bones, their blood, their dreams, a memory older than language. And every time we forced a needle between them, every time we charted their suffering in tidy black ink, we tore another stitch from that ancient tapestry. I saw it in their eyes just before the light left them. Not hatred, not fear, loss. As if they knew exactly what we were taking. And as I lay awake, haunted by whispers in tongues I could not name, I began to wonder if severing them was not only destroying them, but unraveling some part of the world that was never meant to be divided. The surgeries were never announced. There was no ceremony, no official notice pinned to the barracks doors, just a curt nod from the senior doctor and a scribbled set of orders. The twins would be removed from their beds, led down tiled corridors that smelled of iron and something sour, and strapped onto operating tables without a word of explanation. We were told not to speak to them, not to comfort, not to explain. Their bodies were property now. Their bond was an inconvenience to be studied, then discarded. At first, the procedures were minor, small incisions, injections into one twin's bloodstream to monitor the other's reaction. But minor became monstrous quickly. We infected one twin with typhus and measured how long it took the sibling to spike a fever. We introduced gangrene into a left leg and documented how the right twin limped without injury. We severed nerves. We opened chest cavities. We documented swelling, rejection, systemic collapse. There was no anesthesia, none. We needed pure reactions, untainted by sedation. We needed to hear the scream when the scalpel bit bone. We needed to see whether the pain could be transferred, not dulled. I held them down sometimes. Small wrists in my gloved hands, slick with sweat and terror. I held them steady while they trembled and tore their throats raw against the straps. And I wrote it all down. Pulse rate, respiratory failure, pupil dilation, every metric, every tremor. At first, they still reached for each other, even through the agony, even when separated by walls and doors and distance, their fingers would search. Their eyes would strain toward the sound of the other's cry. But over time, something changed. They stopped whispering, stopped reaching. The surgeries piled up like storm clouds. Infections spread, bones snapped. Scar tissue bloomed like grotesque flowers beneath ruined skin. The twins, who once clung to each other as if tethered by breath itself, began to flinch at proximity. Twins who had never spent a moment apart would sit side by side and not touch. Their gazes turned inward, hollow, as if whatever thread once linked them had been burned away, leaving only frayed ends. I noticed it first in their eyes, a stillness that wasn't peace, an absence that wasn't sleep. They weren't resisting anymore. They weren't surviving. They were unweaving, becoming loose strands where once there had been something whole. I recorded the observations mechanically. Subject 301A shows no sympathetic response to 301B's induced trauma. Subjects no longer display mirror behaviors under stress conditions. Subject pairs exhibit signs of dissociation and catatonia. Sterile words. Words that didn't describe the true horror. The way a touch would make them recoil. The way they refused to look at each other. The way their breathing no longer synced in sleep. We didn't just sever a bond, we hollowed it, gutted it, left the husks standing, and all the while I watched, clipboard in hand, pen moving over pages already stained with ink and guilt. I watched a left twin reach for his brother one final time, hesitant, trembling, and saw the right twin pull away, curling into himself like a wounded animal. I wrote, "Subject exhibits withdrawal behavior," but what I should have written was, "We broke them, not their bodies." That was incidental. We broke something older, something without a name. Something that had held them together when the trains arrived, when the guards screamed, when the needles tore into them. We shattered a silence that had been sacred. And in that still, bitter ruin, I saw not just the end of them. I saw the unraveling of everything human that had once lived inside me. When the camp fell, I wasn't dragged before a tribunal. I wasn't thrown into a cell or made to stand in a dock while names were read aloud like curses. I was hidden, a whisper among whispers, folded into new papers, a new name, a life carefully constructed out of a mission. They said it was necessary, that my knowledge was valuable, that forgetting my past would be my contribution to a better future. I nodded. I signed. I disappeared. But the silence didn't. It followed me, into the crowded markets where the chatter should have drowned it out, into city squares where children ran laughing through fountains, into packed train compartments and theater halls. The spaces where sound should have been thick and messy felt thin, hollow, as if somewhere between every shout and laugh there was a missing echo, a twin silence where something had once been and now was not. I tried to explain it once. Tried to tell a colleague about the sensation of seeing two shoes placed side by side in a shop window and feeling an ache, a wrongness, as if those shoes mourned the feet they were supposed to match. He laughed, called it survivor's guilt, said it would pass. It didn't, it deepened. I began seeing pairs everywhere, gloves, socks, bookends, anything designed to be mirrored, and each time I felt a tug, a sorrow that had no words, a hole where connection had been severed. At night, I heard whispers in rooms where no one lived, soft, urgent, fragments of a language I never learned but could almost remember. They slipped through the vents, hummed in the radiator pipes, flickered in the spaces between the click of a lock and the creak of a floorboard. I would wake from dreams drenched in sweat, clutching my own hands as if expecting someone else's smaller fingers to be there. Sometimes, when crossing a busy street, I'd see children holding hands, and for a flickering instant, they would look exactly like the twins I catalogued. Same height, same gait, same impossible connection. And then the light would change, and they would vanish into the crowd, leaving me standing there, gripping the absence they left behind. I moved often. New towns, new identities. I thought if I kept running, the silence wouldn't know where to find me, but it's not tied to a place. It's tied to what was lost, what we severed. We didn't just destroy bodies. We didn't just erase names. We shredded unseen threads, delicate bonds that stitched life to life, soul to soul. A web of connection so ancient that to tear it is to tear at the fabric of the world itself. We thought we were testing resilience, measuring biology, expanding knowledge. But what we really did was make the world colder, more fragmented, more silent, and in that silence I now live, a witness to something unspoken, a keeper of ghosts I can never name, a mirror reflecting only the space where someone else should be. Sometimes I wonder if the twins, wherever they are, wherever their broken halves wandered, still search for one another in the dark. Still reach out blind, hoping for a hand that will never find them. And sometimes I wonder if the silence I hear is not empty at all, but filled with all the voices we extinguished, all the connections we ripped apart, waiting, listening, echoing back the shape of what was lost. I used to believe the experiments were about them, the twins, the bodies we catalogued, divided, reshaped, the souls we tried to dissect like anatomy lessons. I thought they were the subjects, but I see it now. We were the ones being rewritten, piece by piece, slice by slice. Every cut we made in them carved something deeper into ourselves, something that didn't bleed, but still died all the same. I remember standing in the empty barracks after the liberation, the bunks stripped, the floors scrubbed raw, the silence thick as a second skin. No cheers, no triumph, no redemption, just the low, humming absence of what had been torn away. The rows of small beds, still holding the impression of bodies that had never grown into what they should have been. The twisted sheets, still tangled by hands that no longer existed. There was no victory here, only the wreckage of a thread that had been severed so completely, no amount of time could ever weave it back together. We didn't just end lives. We ended continuities. We amputated the future from itself, and in doing so, we rewrote the meaning of our own existence. Every order we followed, every procedure we documented, was another incision into our own humanity, cutting away empathy, amputating guilt, cauterizing memory until only hollow compliance remained. We became perfect subjects, measured, obedient, empty. We were taught to look without seeing, to touch without feeling, to destroy without mourning. And somewhere along the way, the scalpel turned inward. We didn't survive the experiments. We were re-engineered by them, not into something stronger, not into something wiser, into something less. I wonder sometimes, on those nights when the silence presses too close, when the air hums with the weight of unseen whispers, where their souls went, the twins we split apart, who we dissected with hands colder than steel. Did they find each other again, somewhere beyond the reach of our knives? Did they mend what we tore? Or do they still wander, half-formed, half-remembered, reaching across an endless dark for a bond that no longer exists? I wonder if their last memories were of each other, or of us, the ones who stood between them. I wonder if they look for us too, not out of hatred, not even out of sorrow, but because in those final moments we became linked in a way no scalpel could sever. A bond forged not by love, but by destruction. We are the missing halves now. We are the echoes. When I close my eyes, I don't see bodies on operating tables anymore. I see mirrors, thousands of them, shattered, each shard reflecting the face I no longer recognize. The final experiment wasn't about the limits of the human body. It was about the breaking point of the human soul. And we passed it, willingly, without anesthesia. We thought we could study connection by cutting it apart. We thought we could understand love by extinguishing it. All we proved is that once certain things are broken, truly broken, they do not heal. They do not grow back. They echo, they haunt, they hollow. And in the spaces where once two souls stood together, there is now only one, incomplete, listening, waiting for something that can never be repaired. I don't expect forgiveness. There's nothing left clean enough to forgive. The twins are gone, their names erased, their bonds unraveled by hands that once trembled, then steadied, then forgot what trembling even meant. But sometimes, when I stand too long between mirrors or walk corridors hollowed by time, I hear them. Soft whispers, not accusations, not rage, just fragments, pieces of what was torn and scattered, a breath where there should be none, a weight where only air should press. If you ever feel it, standing alone yet sensing another heartbeat beside yours, if you ever hear something shifting in the spaces no voice should reach, maybe you're hearing it too. Not ghosts, not guilt, the bond that should have been, the threads we cut, and the silence that will never let us forget.